Hello, and thank you for taking the time to join this talk. As you can see from the cowardly disclaimer, nothing in this talk should be construed as government policy or anything. I just work here. Or rather, I used to work there in that office. Behind me in this photo is the new HMRC office in Bristol, which opened in September 2019. It closed again at the end of March 2020, and we've not been back in. I've had a few different job titles at HMRC. The one I'm currently being paid for is Head of Agile Delivery Management. It's a rather convoluted job title. I've got it for a couple of reasons. The first is that there's a civil service digital data and technology profession which doesn't have the concept of a lead delivery manager. You've got junior delivery manager, senior delivery manager, and then it jumps to head of agile delivery management. I can't explain the brackets. I think of them as air quotes whenever I introduce myself. The second reason is simply that I was the only person to apply for the role. I'd been at HMRC working on MDTP for nearly 3.5 years. Prior to that, I ran my own company, mostly doing IT support for SMEs. It's basically a heartwarming tale of a white, middle-class, privately educated man finally making it and landing a job in government. You'll be relieved to hear that this is not what I intend to talk about. I should actually, at this point, say that what I am going to talk about is the things that I know about. That might seem obvious, but I want to, we'll come back to it. Last time I gave a talk like this one, a 4-year-old came in behind me to get some printer paper. I removed that risk by taking them to school, but I do now have a new set of potential small furry interruptions. Our kittens, they're very new and they do a reasonable impression of parrots at the moment, which I was not anticipating. With that out of the way, here's the plan for what I am going to talk about. I've got no idea how much any of you may already know about IT in the public sector, so I'm afraid there's going to be quite a bit of scene setting before we get to the main event. Again, I want to caveat this quite strongly. So I'm going to talk about things that I know most about. It's a long time since I wrote any code myself, so I'm not going to be able to go into great depth about how Scala is implemented on the platform. And there are also a lot of people who don't work directly with me who contributed to the success of the schemes I'm going to talk about. And I really wouldn't want to give the impression that this all happened just on the platform without their input. There were people working in the security side of things, the compliance side of things, the anti-fraud, or I don't know, for an example, we operate digital services that were accepting claims from people, but we don't actually do the back transfers to get the money into people's bank accounts. So I say there are lots of stages, and we are not the whole story, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that we were. I've never worked anywhere so enamored with acronyms. Occasionally you come across an acronym which is an acronym of an acronym, but it's like Inception. I'll try and reduce my use of them today, but there are the two I won't be able to avoid. Firstly, HMRC, HM, Revenue and Customs, is the tax agency, the tax authority for the British government. In any news story on the internet about us, a variant of this image will be used. And then MDTP. It stands for Multi-Channel Digital Tax Platform, upon which all of HMRC's public-facing digital services reside. I will no doubt call it the tax platform or the platform at various points. We have a logo. There's a story behind that image. it's not very interesting. And the punchline is that I paid someone £30 for it. I'm going to start with a bit of a history lesson. HMRC outsourced all its IT. Basically, this is the Aspire contract. We outsourced our IT through Capgemini, who then subcontracted to Fujitsu, Accenture, BT. There's probably other ones not on this chart. It then paid an army of civil servants to check what the suppliers were doing. It wasn't really very efficient. Ultimately, HMRC took them to court to break the Aspire contract, and to do that, they had to prove that Capgemini, Fujitsu, etc., were not acting in the best interests of the client, that is HMRC. The legacy of all of this is that HMRC has a really large IT estate, and most of it still resides in physical data centers operated by Fujitsu. It's old. There are many monolithic platforms, and crucially for this talk, it really doesn't scale very well at all. We're talking about physical tin. In fact, I'm aware of various, they're not really online services, they're mostly calculators, but they are still running on Windows 2003, and they're publicly available, and it makes me quite sad. The other part of this history lesson lies with the Government Digital Service, another acronym, GDS. GDS are responsible for a huge amount of the good stuff that happens with online services provided by the UK government. And if you're interested at all, I encourage you really to read about how they operate, tying together the gov.uk site and the work they do, setting the standards that government digital services have to abide by. I'll probably come back to this, but what I want to highlight with this slide is that all the services on MDTP need to go through an assessment process that is run by GDS. These 10 principles, these design principles, are the bedrock of that assessment. The actual assessment is more technical than this, but these underpin it. And as such, these are the things that we on MDTP need to be enabling. Now, not all of them lie with MDTP. User needs is, for the services, not really for us, but the ability to have a platform where services can iterate, then iterate again, and where people can be consistent. That's something that we work quite hard to make sure that we allow services to be able to do that as easily as possible. And the last one there, make things open. We're quite big proponents of coding in the open. In general, everything is open by default. Obviously, there are things that we can't have open on GitHub, etc. The year after gov.uk was started, MDTP was created. We are a platform as a service, a PaaS. We provide the platform on which HMRC's digital services are hosted. And there are loads of ways that you could achieve that. You could just say that every digital service gets an AWS account or an account on the cloud provider of your choice. But that would be hugely expensive and probably quite an insecure way to achieve it. So instead, we provide as much as we can to make it as easy as possible to deliver a new digital service. So critically, we need to be able to scale, which I guess is why I'm talking here today. But you might be wondering why HMRC has a great need for digital services to scale. The simplest answer is SA peak. Self-assessment peak is the largest business event in the HMRC calendar. Everybody who needs to file a tax return has got 9 months of the year to do so. And yet, people being as they are, everybody leaves it to the last minute, and there's a huge peak of traffic at the end of January. And this was a huge thing. Some people get very excited about SA Peak still. It's become BAU for us. The self-assessment application itself was a fragile Java monolith. It could be scaled, but not enough, and only if you did so months or weeks in advance. New servers would be ordered early in the year and installed and patched and configured, but just for use in the final 2 weeks of January. And it was never enough. I'm not... What to say about this? You've got traffic that is 10 times higher than your baseline. You can either have 10 times the number of physical servers, but that's really, really expensive because we're talking about a lot of traffic, or you end up crashing, which is what happened. I'm not going to go through the last 7 years on MDTP. I think suffice to say it's been successful, award-winning even, and far fewer people now take to Twitter to complain about the website. Now what they complain about is, they're venting about the pain of having to pay taxes rather than the pain of not being able to do so. And I'm far happier with that situation. So let's skip forward to 2020. I think we can all agree it has been a comprehensively awful year on a truly global scale. One of the things that we didn't know at the end of March was that the Chancellor of the Exchequer was going to announce something of a change in the way HMRC tend to operate. Rather than taking money away from people, we were being asked to build services that gave it out to them. In the process, changing HM Revenue and Customs from the least popular of all government departments to the people you can turn to in an hour of need. The spike on this chart, let me show you the chart. The spike on here is from when he first announced the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. And I think it's about 500,000 people or so immediately logged on to estimate what they might be entitled to. So we knew immediately, of course, that there was quite a lot of demand for this. So there are 4 schemes that have gone live on MDTP. There are a couple of others which are being built or will appear in the future, but there are 4 that have currently gone live. The 2 big ones are the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, which I'll refer to as JRS. It introduced me to the word furlough, and Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. Before this went out on Twitter, I was not aware that dogs were eligible for the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, but to be fair, the eligibility criteria don't specify that you need to be a human taxpayer. So if they filed a tax return, they're probably good to go. Statutory sick pay rebate is fundamentally an extension to an existing policy and didn't generate a huge amount of new traffic. And then there was the one that nobody here foresaw, government subsidised half-price Nando's. It was really successful. I guess it was launched at a time when it didn't seem like a really, really bad idea to encourage people to go out to restaurants and sit in enclosed spaces, trying not to cough on each other. The amount of money that cost, I think it was forecast to cost $500 million. It ended up costing a little bit more than that. But what I would say is that it probably did save the jobs of people who otherwise would have been laid off. And that's ultimately what it was trying to do, and not just increase my waistline. There were obviously a number of challenges with these schemes. The biggest one, far and away the biggest one, is that the Treasury is asking for us to build services in about 3 or 4 weeks. In normal times, with design workshops, prototypes, gathering user feedback, an alpha or a beta, it would probably take about 9 months. The other really big problem was that we had nothing except educated guesses to forecast what the traffic profile might be. With an event like SA Peak, HMRC produced really detailed, granular forecasts, which it's possible to do because we've got years and years of data to extrapolate from. With these schemes, I mean, everybody listening to this could probably make a reasonable guess as to how many people might be eligible, and then how many people might try and claim, and when they might try and do so. We were in really uncharted territory. It is all a bit high stakes. Fairly or unfairly, government IT has a strong reputation for being terrible. Quite frankly, fairly often, it still is terrible. And I know of lots and lots of examples of it being done badly. I know of current projects which I fear are heading in the same direction. I hope that gradually improvements are being made, because that's the only way we'll change our reputation. I also believe the reputation of HMRC has been on an upward trajectory in recent years, which I think is only fair, because I'd certainly argue that we're now pretty good at what we do. We really needed to try everything we could to avoid this sort of story. Not especially because we fear the wrath of the press or anything, but because what these types of stories mean when using these schemes is that people who really need the money aren't able to get it. And with all of these schemes, we were really aware that there were people, and I know people myself, who have lost all income, and they were in some cases entirely reliant on the grants or the wages being paid from the government, and delays in getting that money out to them could have a really, really serious impact on them. So why MDTP? There's an obvious answer to this question, which is because MDTP have something of a monopoly at the moment on citizen-facing services provided by HMRC. So maybe an earlier question should be why HMRC, certainly for some of these. However, it wasn't just that MDTP was used. It was that data was stored on MDTP, and that was a bit of a change for us. Previously, MDTP most often would provide a shiny front end, and then the data transaction would be passed back to the legacy IT estate. That wasn't going to work for these services. So very early on, the decision was made to ensure that there were no synchronous API calls to the legacy estate. As much as possible would be handled on MDTP itself. And that's simply because fundamentally we were able to scale. It's probably overdue for me to highlight the geographical scale of this. The platform teams who run MDTP itself are largely based in Bristol. We used to be in London, and we migrated quite slowly in kind of 2018, 2019. However, the digital service teams, the tenants of our platform, are based up and down the country in some wonderfully glamorous locations. If you've never been to Telford, just don't. The numbers here can be a little bit misleading. I know how many teams there are on MDTP. I do know that. But there are a few people who sit between teams. I know how many people there are working on MDTP, but I also know that it's only the civil servants working on MDTP who count towards the HMRC headcount figure. I know how many teams there are in GitHub, but I also know that some of those teams don't have any members. I would generally consider the 2,000 odd people on our Slack instance to be mostly HMRC digital. So that will be developers, delivery leads, product owners, user researchers, some dedicated testers, the whole gamut of a agile software development team. And they are all contributing to the services on MDTP. So each digital service will have its own cross-functional agile team, and all of those will be hanging out on Slack. CDIO, sorry, it's another acronym I haven't explained. Chief Digital Information Office, something like that. It's basically HMRC's IT department. But as I say, that figure is really a bit misleading as well. So we do operate at some scale. There are about 120 different digital services that HMRC provide via MDTP. Again, it rather depends on how you count them. A service like personal tax account consists of many different services. And each digital service will be composed of a number of different microservices. And there are some microservices which are used by very large numbers of others, particularly the ones around authentication and many others. I mean, we obviously encourage reuse wherever we can. So I want to explain how we try and make this work. Let's take a step back quickly. As I've said, MDTP is the platform as a service. We also have an API platform, which is used by third-party developers, big players like Sage or DHL, down to smaller outfits. We have a microservice architecture. The microservices are stateless, and given any microservice, any given microservice on MDTP, it can be running anywhere between 2 to 32 instances itself. So we are spread across 3 different availability zones in AWS, and every single microservice will need to be running at least 2 instances in 2 different availability zones to provide some resilience. We could mandate 3, but there's probably no real benefit because we're talking about services that don't get a lot of traffic. The maximum number at the moment is 32, and that's always been enough so far. This is an oversimplification, of course, but for the purposes of today, there are 2 zones. That's a complete lie. There's a public zone for front-end microservices and a protected zone for back-end microservices. The only real difference in these zones is the connectivity allowed. So the public zone is obviously reachable from the internet. That's where we hold the front-end microservices. The protected zone is not reachable from the internet. And furthermore, front-end microservices cannot talk to the HMRC legacy estate, can't speak to the corporate tier. Back-end microservices are necessary for that. The model we use is the Heroku slug runner model. That's likely to change next year, to be frank, but we build slugs and then they're deployed to Docker containers running on our app servers. I'm going to concentrate, though, on what MDTP provides for developers, because I think that's more interesting. So this slide probably best encapsulates what MDTP is and what it does better than any architectural diagram. It's a collection of technologies, and we use those technologies to provide rails upon which it's possible to go very fast. It does also mean some restrictions. I guess I could construct some very convoluted metaphor explaining how some people want to drive a car rather than a train, but I'll resist. What I will say is that when a team comes to us and requests a new feature, we are open to those ideas. Our criteria really are that we want to make sure that everything that we provide is self-service and available for all teams to use. If it's just for the benefit of one team, then we are less interested and probably less likely to agree to it. So self-service is a critical part of why this works. For the COVID-19 services, we had developers writing code around the clock, putting in honestly ridiculous hours. And it was really important that the platform was not a blocker to that. All the things that a developer might want to do are self-service, including deploying new code into environments, right up to and including production. What we really want to do is get out of the way so that developers can get on with writing code and getting that code deployed. Which brings me to our build system. Each change to the code will trigger a new build, and if you so choose, that can run through the pipeline all the way to production. They're all automated pipelines. I ought to clarify one thing here, that the last step in our pipeline is a deployment to our staging environment for load and performance testing. There are a couple of reasons for this, I guess. Firstly, as it stands today, performance tests in the environment are run in series. So you would get times when there was a long queue of jobs. As a platform, we've got some unanswered questions about how best to improve this, about whether we can allow performance tests to be run in parallel. Secondly, we don't do automated deployments to production. We could do, and maybe one day we'll want to, but at the moment, we can't see a pressing reason to remove that final manual step. And some people would get quite nervous, I think. This is something that's likely to be out of date very soon, but at the moment, all deployments on MDTP are rolling deployments with zero downtime. The microservices are on MDTP are all stateless, as I've said, so we can deploy during a user journey with zero impact. Very soon, we'll be offering all service teams some different deployment strategies, probably Canary, etc. But I suspect that this is going to be the default for a while yet, because it works really, really well. This speaks to the balance that we are constantly trying to strike. I would argue that one reason that the platform has been a success and why it's been able to scale to have 1,000 developers writing code on it is because we do a small number of things really well. And that works for 95% of the services on MDTP. It works well for them. However, there are, of course, always exceptions. Teams who want new stuff, new technologies, the latest shiny. It can create tension. What we look to do, as I've said, is we assess whether there's a genuine unmet need, and then gauge the level of demand across multiple teams. And then if there is that demand and it is, meeting an unmet need, then we try and make it available in such a way that it's self-service and that it's in a good state for every team to use. However, sometimes we just have to say no. One last point on this. We are, in this regard, sometimes guilty of quite shameless hypocrisy. As platform teams, we enjoy near complete freedom to experiment with and indeed use almost any technology that takes our fancy. The only real constraint we've got is around security, I suppose. And we are forthright in defending that freedom to use technologies that are not in use elsewhere in HMRC. Yeah, sorry. Not sorry. Because HMRC Digital has always been spread out geographically, in some ways we were well positioned when lockdown happened. There's always been a degree of remote working, but we've always valued face-to-face collaboration, and I do think we're missing something at the moment. The point I want to make is that when you operate at this scale, it really helps if you have ways to allow people to ask questions, get answers, and work together, be it on video calls or remote pairing, or we've got the technology, it's just finding the best ways to use it. One key aspect of that, one key tool is Slack. We use Slack a lot. Again, there's a balance struck between complete freedom and having some rules and conventions. So we have guidance on how channels should be named. We encourage people to ask questions in public channels so others can see the answers. We also leverage Slack for delivering alerts from our monitoring, again, to public channels so that everybody can see what's going on. And yeah, you can see on this chart where we all ended up working remotely. Google image search for phrases occasionally does turn up absolute gold. Good culture doesn't just happen by accident. I think some people imagine it does. Whether it's within a single team or across the platform as a whole, if you are able to grow an open and supportive culture, it's because people are working really hard to cultivate that. It's a combination of enthusiasm and pride in what we can achieve. And it happens at HMRC because people spend time and effort encouraging it. And it's also absolutely priceless. It pays off time and time again. Another thing that comes from operating at scale is that sometimes it slows you down. Sometimes it slows you down a lot because we need to be really considerate. If we mandate a change that is needed for each microservice, that can involve hundreds of teams needing to make a change in over 1,000 different repositories. We try really hard to do this hard work on behalf of teams, ensuring that when we make a change, it can happen transparently without the service teams needing to do anything. It can't always happen. Often there are security fixes where we need people to update libraries. But as an example, we very recently migrated all our deployment tooling, and it didn't involve any work for nearly all of the service teams. We did a lot of work to make it smooth and a lot of testing to ensure it succeeded. The intention is that this allows the digital delivery teams to focus on their users, taxpayers, citizens, businesses of this country. Again, trying not to get in the way and trying to allow developers to do what they do best. Digital moved to remote working on the day the government asked us to work from home if we could work from home. The government, when the government first announced the lockdown, on MDTP we'd actually already been remote working for a week. This chart isn't as pronounced as the Slack one, but the number of deployments to production that happened before and after the lockdown was announced. And what it's showing is that the number of deployments actually increased. I should really get some more data for it so it's clearer. I think it's worth pointing out that some people love working from home. There's no commute, there's no one microwaving category for lunch. and you can sit at your desk with your 38-inch monitors. And for some people, though, it means working at the kitchen table. And with kids who aren't at school, either demanding attention or streaming videos that cause the cool you're on to stutter. It's different for different people. HMRC took a couple of weeks to reflect on what had happened and then reacted in the way that they always do when faced with a difficult situation. They announced a change freeze. I reacted to this change freeze in the way I like to think HMRC pays me to. I ignored it, and I told anyone who asked that it didn't apply to MDTP. I then followed this up by writing a passive-aggressive post on LinkedIn about how change freeze is entirely counterproductive. Fortunately, there are some people within HMRC Digital who are considerably more diplomatic than me, and within a couple of weeks, with a mixture of charm and evidence that working remotely made no difference to us, the change freeze waiver was formalized and extended to cover the services that run on the tax platform. So I think it's time to give some raw numbers. I think they largely speak for themselves. These numbers are not out of the ordinary for any given week. The services on MDTP are being constantly iterated upon, and I believe the platform they run on plays a large part in enabling that to happen. I don't want to take anything away from the developers actually making these changes, but I do intend to steal their success. Next, I'll just show what this meant for the two largest COVID services in particular. JRS, the job retention scheme, the furlough one. They started building the service on the 23rd of March, and it launched less than a month later on the 21st of April. This chart is completely illegible. At the bottom are dates, and there were deployments on each of these days into our staging environment every single day, except one. This chart is even less legible, but again, there are dates at the bottom, and again, there have been regular deployments of every change in staging. Not all of these changes will have been pushed to production. Again, the point I want to get across is that the service is iterated upon. Some of these changes will have been from user feedback. Some of them will have been because there were features that didn't make the cut for launch. Our PlatOps team on the platform played a role on these services. They built a microservice that facilitated the compliance and fraud detection part. It's obviously important when you're giving away billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to do everything you can to ensure that fraud is minimized. You might be looking at this and thinking it's not a good thing if we've so many bugs that we need to do this many releases after launch, but that isn't what this is showing. If I remember correctly, there was an annoying thing. It only manifested in something like Internet Explorer 9, which some major employer was still using in their accounts department. And one of the newer features that we built is allowing companies to voluntarily repay money that they've claimed. So that's not something that was required on launch day. Just for variety, this shows SEES, the Self-Employed Income Support Service, but this time releases into production. We encourage teams to deploy to production before launch because it goes some way to prevent a big bang release. In this case, there will have been a private beta for a small number of users before the service launched. And again, this service was built and launched in a hurry, and there were features that we wanted to add to it. These will have been, so these are again releases on the days after launch, and they will have been small bug fixes, improvements to content, and just refactoring things that were done in the middle of the night after too much coffee. I really can't praise the teams who built these services enough. They did an astonishing job. I don't mean to labour this point, but our PlatOps team played a role supporting with SEES as well. They built a microservice that took the data from the HMRC corporate tier and it was used for ingesting that data into Mongo so it can be used by the main service. And that was critical because everyone knew that we needed to have data held locally on the platform. We couldn't have API calls going back to the corporate estate because it just couldn't cope with the volumes of traffic. A few other things that we needed to do as a platform. This was a bit surprising to me, but previously we've always been able to meet the needs of any service wanting to do load testing by having a really big instance of Gatling. That didn't work for these COVID services. We needed to run a few instances in parallel to get up to the levels of traffic that we could encounter. And then once we'd done that and the load testing was being done at those levels, we managed to break the logging pipeline in staging. This really illustrates to me that the load testing that we do isn't just for the benefit of the service teams, but we all need to work together. And in this case, we needed to scale up our logging pipeline in both staging and, of course, production. The logging pipeline wasn't the only part of the platform we ended up scaling out. We increased the size of the instances in our Mongo clusters, as well as various other bits of infrastructure, load balancers, proxies. The other thing we did was we provisioned a feature of Akamai, which was a sort of waiting room, just in case we did get completely overwhelmed. I don't think I've been able to build much of a sense of suspense here, since you likely all know the outcome. A lot of people who haven't been able to work have been provided with support from the government, and those claims have nearly entirely been made online through services hosted on MDTP. So it was a huge success for us. This is one for the lessons learnt pile. With job retention scheme, it was companies who claim it. And we know how many companies there are. And generally, when they make a claim, will be related to when they're doing payroll. With Cs, we didn't know this. We knew that somewhere around 3.5 million people would be eligible to claim. And if they all tried to log on to make a claim at the same time, we knew we would have a problem. So we decided to stagger those claims. We emailed, texted, wrote letters to everyone who was eligible and gave them a date on which they could claim, which was very sensible. And then we got a bit clever. It was decided it would be even safer if we split each day into two. 500,000 people could claim in the morning and 500,000 people could claim in the afternoon, which has some logic. But then we made a near catastrophic mistake and told people they could claim at 8 a.m. or midday. The 8 a.m. peak was fairly dramatic. The midday peak came quite close to breaking Government Gateway. Government Gateway had been tested to cope with about 200 logins a second, and it was hit with over 1,000 logins a second. So yeah, if you are ever in the position where you're giving away thousands of pounds to people who are at home, unable to work, my advice is clear. Do not give them a specific time to make that claim. We've had a load of amazing feedback from digital delivery teams and from people across HMRC. This was just some stuff on our Slack. We also had Jim Harrer, he's the head of HMRC, and indeed indirectly his boss, the Chancellor. Rather amazingly, HMRC got positive reports in the media as well. But most important for us was that the users had a good experience. The customer satisfaction ratings are about 97%, and that's unheard of. It turns out that running a website to give away billions of pounds makes you very popular indeed. It has done wonders for our reputation. I really don't know why we didn't think of doing it years ago. One bit of praise did rather stick out. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was really good. It's nice to hear a mostly positive news story for a change in our current climate. And we often enjoy like almost scalability porn, people hearing about failures at scale. So it's really nice to hear about how things went well and how they've gone. Um, we've got a whole bunch of questions in the from the audience, so we'll push ahead with those and see how you feel about them. So, um, Dazzle HF asked, "It looks like there've been many challenges with the transformation that's underway. What has for you been the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome in transforming how HMRC works and delivers digital services?"
So I think that the biggest challenge is that we haven't been able to do that. MDTP is fundamentally the place where they host the pretty front ends. There are still, nearly all the tax data is still held on legacy systems, and the people operating those are really great people, and they're doing a fantastic job, but they haven't adopted our ways of working. They are primarily, if they're looking to move out of data centers, there's little appetite for re-architecting things. It's unfortunately, money is, budgets are obviously very important, and people think that the re-architecting it is going to be a lot more expensive than a lift and shift. I think they're wrong, but that's the challenge that we've really got. I think is that I think with all of with government departments all have a kind of a digital bit, or most of them do anyway. And I think the idea was that they would become a virus to infect the rest of the organisation and really drive digital transformation that way. And I don't think it's happened.
What makes you what's the challenge? Why is that not happening? Do you have any view from your experience within HMRC? Why is it that other bits of the organisation don't want to adopt that? Is there something you can pull out, or is it just as Nigel said, the digital transformation doesn't really work? Is it just as fundamental as that?
I think partly it can be as fundamental as that. Partly I think it's budgets, and partly it's, you have a huge number of vested interests. You have people who've been doing their job for a large number of years, and they know how to do it, and they're very good at it, and they're not interested in, suddenly having to do things with post-it notes.
So there's a combination of questions in here. So James Abley and Jeff Paras are both asking, essentially, MDTP has been going for a few years now. What historical decisions are causing you pain, or what areas would you change, improve, or do things differently if you got to do it again?
So I think there are a whole load of things. I think that kind of every historical decision that has been made, you look back on and you think, you could have done things differently. Operating with Scala is, I guess, one obvious one. It's not, an enormously popular language. It's a little bit niche, and in some ways that's limiting us. And certainly people complain to me that it adds to our cost because, Scala developers are more expensive than other more popular languages might be. I think really, the platform has not been built and then stayed static. We've been through at least 4 kind of major iterations, and we've been able to do that relatively smoothly. I think the one thing that I feel wasn't done in the way that I would have liked it to have been done right at the beginning, maybe, is security. I don't think that security was the kind of first-class citizen that it should have been at the beginning, which is not to say that we're insecure, but more that we needed to do more work to advertise our security to other parts of HMRC who have a traditional cybersecurity function, and we worked around them rather than with them.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I have a personal anecdote. I was present when we were creating the MDTP, so some of it's my fault. I'm really sorry, but we had a meeting to bring together security managers from across HMRC to talk to us about what security we needed. And we had 7 different people with the same job title of security manager turn up, 2 of whom had never met each other. And that was one of my first experiences, the scale of an organization like HMRC. can you talk about the complexity of dealing with an organization of that scale? The number of services that you run, the number of systems that you have to manage and run within HMRC is mind-bogglingly big compared to many other government departments and many smaller organizations. What's it like working within that scale?
So the story that I always get told is that, it doesn't matter what you're looking to do in HMRC, there will be another team who are also trying to do the same thing. It's just trying to find them, which is the difficult bit. And that proves to be true time and time again. It's difficult. Within HMRC Digital, I think we're quite a close-knit group, and Slack. I mean, I know I've talked a lot about Slack in that talk, but it really does provide a common space where people can come together, and the right people to ask the right questions will be in the right channel, and it's really, really valuable. Beyond that, if you have to go out onto the HMRC intranet to try and find the information that you're looking for, it's less efficient, and there are large parts of HMRC that we have to work with, and that lots of digital services have their own dependencies that they have to know. As a platform, we have to rely on the services to know who those dependencies are and to have those relationships. What we really have a problem with is when we get to a stage where those services are handed over into live. They go through their GDS assessment. They are, deemed to be feature complete and live, and this is the service. So we hand them over to a live support team at the moment, and that live support team don't have those relationships. They they're either starting from scratch, or literally they don't bother until something goes wrong, and they end up trying to find the phone number on the runbook and speaking to somebody they've never spoken to before.
Yeah, well, it's a very similar question came in from Dave 10101, and I think probably a very similar answer. But we imagine every government department is probably doing the same process. They're building a hosting platform. They're having to pull together container orchestration. All the services that are required. Do they all need to exist? Surely HMRC, as one of the big players, could just host it for all of government. Is there any reason why you're not doing
that? So the main reason that we're not doing it, I think, is because government departments are very protective of their own data and their own ways of doing things, and they wouldn't want HMRC to be hosting this stuff for them. Beyond that, I think that there's the way that MDTP is set up is in some ways really specific to HMRC. We do have a few services which are from other departments, and to be honest, they're the ones who cause us most pain, because they don't have the support structures around them that we provide to kind of our own tenants, as it were. And so they don't have, maybe it's as simple as colleagues sat on a desk next to you to ask, how do you do this? And that causes us problems. But yeah, I mean, things like if you log in through Government Gateway to MDTP, a load of information about your tax status is automatically, available to whichever service you're using. That probably shouldn't be the case if we were hosting, something from Department of Education. But having said that, there is definitely, room for synergies. There are departments doing very, very similar things, and I'm sure that we should be able to work more closely together than we are.
And I think Hatter Monkeys asks a very similar question, having come a little bit late, but said, GDS, the Government Digital Service, provides a platform as a service for government. Did you consider using that instead? What would that offer that MDTP doesn't, or vice versa?
So what it offers that MDTP doesn't is the ability to run a whole range of different languages. I mean, it's far advanced of us in that way. The truth is that we got there first. We were building MDTP for years before the GDS cross-government pass came along. And also, I think that we have a specific requirement about the ability to scale, and I haven't tested it, but I don't think that the GDS one is set up for the volumes of traffic that we would end up putting on them. It would certainly be interesting to find out, though, what the kind of cost equivalents would be.
Great. Well, okay. I'd like to move topics because we talked about the platform quite a lot. James Abley asked a question, and aware that it's tricky to answer in a public forum. But have you had to introduce new security monitoring systems? You're suddenly giving away money in a way that HMRC has never done before. How are you doing work around detecting fraud and making sure that you're building a secure platform that can't have the money stolen from it?
So HMRC has always given away money. We do it in VAT rebates and all sorts of other things. You can claim money back from HMRC if you've overpaid, etc. So there's always been a requirement to be secure, and there's always been a requirement to detect fraud. We have a team who run on MDTP. They used to be called transaction monitoring. They've just been rebranded, and they, transaction monitoring was a good name because that's what they did. They monitor the transactions, they collect the audit events, and that then is used by our fraud investigation services. So there are a lot of people doing a lot of work on this. For these particular COVID response schemes, we were given a very clear instruction that the most important thing was speed of delivery and to get this money out and to the bank accounts of people who needed it as fast as we could. We didn't skip anything in terms of the fraud detection. In fact, what we ended up doing was using a third party to help with that, using some machine learning to look for the more low-hanging fruit, and then everything else would be passed to our normal fraud investigations team. And I think that's starting to play out in terms of their arrests this week. But I guess that's the thing, is that it was very much front-loaded on get the money out to people, and we'll worry about people who've committed fraud later and go after them then. The numbers that Jim Harrow, the head of HMRC, has talked about as maybe up to kind of 5% of claims are fraudulent. I really don't believe that figure. I think that's really pessimistic. I think that's a figure maybe of claims that we want to investigate further, but I find it highly unlikely that that's the actual fraud figure.
So changing gears once more, obviously we talk about scaling not just technology but people and teams. To get this delivered, it looks like it was a massive deadline and not a lot that you could do about it, but the team will have had to have pulled long hours, will have had to work really hard. How was the well-being of those people and those teams maintained during that time, and how did you take care of that?
So I didn't have a huge role to do with that because as a platform person, we are separate from the teams writing the Scala code and delivering it. That said, there were our platform operations team had to write some microservices in order to facilitate this, and they were working ludicrous hours. What can you do? I think that's a really good question. I mean, what we made sure was that they were appreciated, and that we were giving them time off as soon as we could for allow them to recover. In fact, I had to jump on one hangout and tell somebody, you haven't slept for 36 hours, you need to stop this and go to bed. But it's more, I think, about the culture of the team as a whole and making sure that everybody is supporting everybody else, and that's the most important thing that you can try and build. And making sure that people get recognized and rewarded through their pay and things for what they're actually doing, and that it's not just expected. And that was, I think, in this scheme, people were really prepared to work the long hours because it was seen as being a really, really valuable thing to be working on. The risk around it was not that we were asking people to do that. The risk was that for the next scheme, people would say, oh, well, we can do it in 4 weeks, therefore we should do it in 4 weeks. And it's the danger that it sets a precedent, which is the bigger problem, I think.
And following on from that, I mean, obviously people were very motivated and very interested in supporting the COVID relief, supporting the country. It's a really easy motivation to see as a team. But Dave 10101 just asked in the chat, like, how does HMRC motivate you to work when your role is to tax people? Like, does it feel like you're there to take money away from people? How do you motivate the team and feel like you have a mission? It's a bit of an unfair question, sorry, but I thought it's an interesting one.
I'm not a politician. No, it is an interesting one. I really like working for HMRC, and yes, we are taxing Britain, but we're not doing it, because we don't like people having their own money. We're doing it because we like things like schools and hospitals and nurses and doctors and councils and those sorts of things. The amount of money we've given out this year in COVID relief is a small percentage of the amount of money that flows in through MDTP every year, and it's that money that can be spent on good things. Now, of course, you can have political views about whether you'd rather it went on nuclear weapons or a hospital. I don't think it's too naive of me to say that that's not my role. I'm here to I'm an operations person, I guess, and I like that. I don't feel that I'm morally compromised by working for HMRC.
Yeah, we've got a lot of public servants in the chat. People I recognise from my time working with them, and I think many of them would say the same things. Working for public service is a reward almost by itself. You feel like you're helping support a system that supports the citizenry. Okay, I've got another question. So, delivery manager, you've used the term quite a few times, and it's popular inside government, but it's not as popular outside government. What does it mean to you? What is the role of delivery manager, and how has the role changed over time as you've been doing it?
So, for me personally, it's a different situation, I think. I came in and joined HMRC as a digital product owner at the time, was my job title. And for various reasons, moved into a more technical role, I guess, because, I had the ability to, and also because lots of other people left and there were vacancies, and why not? To take the broader question, I think of delivery manager within HMRC anyway as being broadly synonymous with Scrum Master. It's just that we're not necessarily all doing Scrum. So I view it as an agile role within the kind of traditional agile team setup, but it's less prescriptive than just saying, you have to do Kanban or you have to do Scrum or whatever.
Great. Well, finally,
sorry, I'm just trying to think. I mean, in terms of what the actual role is, I mean, it's all about removing blockers. I think, you try and find out what is stopping your team from progressing more quickly, and you do what you can to make sure that they can operate more efficiently.
That's a great answer, and I think the delivery managers I've worked with the best, that is exactly what they view their role being. It's not about a job description; it's about unblocking the team, whatever is blocking the team in certain degrees. Right, I think I will just ask a last question around how do you manage the complexity of such an estate, and particularly I see that I can't say it. William Falconer UK has asked in the chat around, as a platform team, how do you interact with those delivery teams, and how do you scale that and make it so that you can deliver all those services on top of your platform team? Is there a secret to it?
Having the rules, possibly. We used to try really hard to go out and to visit the delivery centre. So we'd actually, get on a train and go to Newcastle or whatever, and that was always hugely valuable. That face-to-face time. Obviously, we haven't been able to do that for the last kind of 9-12 months, and we haven't yet got anything that has really replaced it, which is a shame, because I do feel that the developers are our users, and we aren't getting the feedback loops that we need from them. We're trying different things, but it's mostly about just having a space in which you can chat to these people, and Slack gives us that to some extent, and also having the rules of MDTP, having what documentation we have on Confluence. If anybody can find a way of making Confluence searchable, that would be great.
Great. Okay, I have one last question and then I'll let you go, which is I noted, as I think several people in the chat did, as you were going through the presentations, that lots of your tech companies you rely on have got amazing logos, but your logo is a little different. Do you want to tell me the history behind the MDTP logo?
It's a very quick story. Last Christmas, I tried to run a competition for people to draw MDTP. I was hoping for network diagrams. I was hoping for people's visualizations of, this cloud infrastructure. And I got one entry, and that was it. Somebody, obviously with MS Paint or something, fired it off 5 minutes before the closing time. And so I had to pay him for it.
Brilliant, thank you. I really want to thank you, Ben. It's been a delight to have you. It's been a really interesting talk, and I know it's super hard for civil servants to speak on video about some of this stuff. So thank you very much for telling us all about it.
No trouble at all. Thank you.